Camp Quality started really from a magazine article that I was handed in late 1982. I was really looking for something to invest my life in that would give me more satisfaction than just being a sales director. And luckily, this magazine that was handed to me had an article headed, "What can we do for Teddy?" Teddy was a little girl living in New York who on one week had her 10th birthday party, and by the end of that week had been diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. She talked about knowing she was going to die. She talked about her loneliness from other childhood friends, from missing school, from missing all the childhood activities that she'd enjoyed. And her father came up with the idea of taking some children from the cancer ward to a campground together. That night I called him and said, "Tell me about Teddy, what's happening?" And he said the most important thing was when we got her on this campground with these children, we heard her laugh again for the first time. And the more I spoke to him, the more I became convinced that this was what was needed everywhere. We arrived in Sydney in our home in February of 1983 with no furniture, nothing to dust or anything. So I decided, looking at that article again, this is the time. I pulled into the parking lot and went into the hospital and asked for directions to the children's cancer ward. The lady said to me, "You mean oncology?" Now this will show you how little I knew. I didn't know that was the name for the cancer unit. And I said, "Yes, okay, that's the one I need." And I was able to speak to the head of that department, and he said to me very abruptly, "Children in America may need that camping program. Children in Australia do not. I hope you can find something else to do with your time." If I had $1 for everyone who told me this will never work, I could have funded the camp. I got in the car and drove to the Prince of Wales Children's Hospital. Professor O'Gorman Hughes was the head of the cancer unit then. I got to meet with him, and he took me to his office and he said to his secretary, "Start calling all the major hospitals and ask, is there a camping and support program anywhere for kids with cancer?" He came back and he said to her, "What's the response?" And she said, "No. They've all said no, but if we find one, will we let them know?" And so he said to me, "What are you going to do now?" As silly as it sounds now, if I could have turned and run right then, I think I would have. I'd never been around children with cancer, so it was going to be new to me. He walked me up to the bed of this little boy, I think his name was Brent, and he said to Brent, "This lady's a visitor in the hospital. Let her tell you about the idea she's got." And he walked off. And I stood there looking at this very pale little boy. And I took out a notebook then, really kind of keeping my hands busy. "Tell me what you would want to do if you came to such a camp." The thing that impressed me that day, and that continued to impress me all the years of Camp Quality, was what the children asked for was simple things. They wanted to paddle a canoe. They wanted to ride a horse. They wanted to shoot a bow and arrow. All things that as I heard them, I thought, we can do that. That's easy, we can do that. So in September of that same year, we went to camp. It was a huge success. I also knew I needed a name. And I finally was in the hospital one day talking to Professor Les White. And I told him my struggle to find a name. And he said, "Well, I think your idea for the camps is brilliant. But I think, Vera, you have to think about the fact that none of us, including us doctors, can do an awful lot about the quantity of somebody else's life. But we can certainly all help with the quality." And as soon as he said that, I said, "That's it. That's the name I want. Camp Quality. We'll call ourselves Camp Quality." And once they'd been to one camp, the children were getting through treatment, talking to the doctors about, "Now you do know I'm going to the next camp and you'll have to adjust my treatment." And the doctors were coming to me saying, "Vera, it's worked," because the children are now involved not just in getting through the treatment, but getting through in time to go to the next camp. Well, I left there thinking, okay, now the fundraising needs to start, because we actually ended camp $389 in the red, and that made my husband very nervous. And I said, "Don't worry, now no one can tell me it won't work, because I've seen it work. And I have stories that I can tell them about those children that will make them want to help us." The parents really needed a break, and they would then say, "You were saying so-and-so happened to you, well that happened to me," and they'd share it back, and Brian and I would sit back and let them just talk. And the sharing was important because it gave them some support, and they often would say, I thought I was the only one that felt like that. So they shared a lot of really deep things that they hadn't shared with anyone else. So by the time I left, we had 51 camps in 16 or 17 other countries. Our focus was on the children and what was the best for them. But it was a program that touched my heart, and it healed my grief, one Band-Aid at a time, just talking to children who have such a bright outlook on life, despite the fact that they're facing cancer.